Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging on from in the world, and welcome to this latest special Infrastructure Intelligence and Atkins business webinar on the importance of data and its key role in construction transformation. My name is Andy Walker. I'm the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, and this is our first business webinar of 2021. So I think on the 15th of January, it'll probably be maybe the last time that we say Happy New Year to everyone, and let's hope that this year is a year that sees improvements on many fronts, and also the year that, thanks to the brilliant work of scientists, of engineers, of technicians, that we see the vaccination program and the virus hopefully recede into the background, because we've obviously had some very key challenges over the course of the last 12 months or so. As I said, today's event, data, the foundation of construction transformation. Digital and data, extremely important, as we've seen during the course of the pandemic, and it's certainly forced the construction industry, in line with many industries, to think differently, embrace digital, and frankly accelerate what was already an ongoing journey towards digital transformation. I think that process has actually been speeded up. We held a very interesting roundtable on this issue last year in association with Atkins. And today's event is a sort of a follow-up from that, where we hope to delve into the issue of data in a little bit more detail. We've got an absolutely tip-top, first-class panel of speakers with us today to discuss these issues, which includes Mark Reynolds from Mace, Alison Atkinson from the Atomic Weapons Establishment, and also Stephen Dance from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. But before we get underway, because he's also part of our panel, Richard Robinson, who is the UK and Europe CEO of Atkins, is going to say a few words to kick things off. Just before he does, for those that aren't aware, and there can't be many people, Atkins, of course, is one of the world's most respected design and engineering project management consultancies. 20,000 people in the industry, 10,000 based in the UK and Europe. Atkins is part of the S&C Lavalin Group, which has got a very wide, rich history of project delivery around the world. Previously, Richard has held leadership roles at HS2, AECOM, and Heathrow Express, where I think it's fair to say that digital has been at the forefront of much of his work in many of those businesses. And I know he's a passionate advocate of the role of digital in the construction industry. So I'm sure he's going to set us off on the right foot as we begin today's event. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. I'll certainly try. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And look, hello, and welcome everybody to this webinar that Atkins are really pleased to be hosting with Infrastructure Intelligence. It's great to see such a strong turnout of attendees, and I think it's probably no small part due to the fantastic panel we have today. And I'd just like to say a really big thank you for Alison, Stephen, and Mark for joining us today. And I don't think you get many panels better than this across the industry very often, so I'm sure it'll enable us to have a fantastic discussion. Look, and I'm sure many of you, like I have attended your fair share of webinars since last March, probably more than you have in your whole career. And digital transformation is not a new topic, and one you've probably become very familiar with, but I think data puts a new, deeper spin on it that we'll talk about today. So why do we keep talking about digital transformation and data, and why is it of such interest to so many? Well, I think firstly, we have to continue to remind ourselves and recognise that productivity is a massive issue in the construction industry. Over around the last 20 years, productivity has been dead flat in our industry, and on some measures has even slightly declined recently, whereas in the wider economy, productivity has increased around 30%. So that combined with the fact that infrastructure is seen as increasingly important to general economic performance, that lack of performance in our industry has a double impact on the wider economy. And of course, with the huge public debts now incurred in the coronavirus crisis and the need to stimulate the economy back through infrastructure and building, it's crucial we become better as an industry. And digital transformation, I certainly believe, holds the key for this in construction. You know, we know there are mega trends in play that have changed things even in the last 3 years around storage, data centers, internet speeds, processing power. And these things have combined to enable the introduction of artificial intelligence, and which I've heard described as the ability to really lower the cost of prediction, which I think is a really interesting way of talking about AI. And I'm happy to say some more on that later. If this wasn't motivation enough, and I fear it's not, I'll reiterate, our industry has a crucial role in building back better. And as such, we should quite rightly be focusing on how we can deliver more efficiently and effectively. So we know transformation is needed, and I hope all of us are at least starting to agree that digital holds the key. But what makes data the foundation for transformation? Well, the key, I believe, and I'm sure we'll hear this from some of our panelists too, is that data has the power to enable more efficient, effective, and informed decision making, transforming how we manage and deliver projects at the sharp end, optimizing both the construction but also the operation of the asset. One quick example, I think a simple example is a great one, is being able to connect the live data from a static project program with the live activity data on site in a common data environment. That will transform the ability of a project manager to manage the performance on a day-to-day basis, to mitigate risk, to plan for, to react to unforeseen events, which always occur, no matter how well you plan a project. You know, I used to worry about the advent of a little bit of big data about, I know, some 5 years ago, because I felt it was just, we were just getting more data that we didn't know what to do with. But now, obviously, with the tools, the technology trends, and the tools like AI, we're becoming able to make machine learning, AI assisted decisions. And the point on decisions is key. I think it's important that we don't get value from data per se. We get value from the actions that we can perform from the insights that data give us. And the extraction of value requires two things: consistency in how that data is structured, and management of the information or data. So look, I think, you know, I started my career early in the chemical industry, and I do sometimes cast an envious glance back to that time, because even in the late 90s in manufacturing and chemical production, standardized processes were normal. We had performance data down to 1 second resolution, and we would constantly use that to optimize the processes we ran. That's a model I try and keep in mind when I'm thinking about what might be possible in improving the construction industry. You know, our industry is fundamentally fragmented and complex. We have many disparate players, and we seem to often want to specialize in one-off bespoke solutions. And as an engineering company, you know, I see that quite often with some of our engineers who love coming up with new stuff. If we want to impose digital technology, we need to have consistency. And the key to this is information management, I think, and a good step forward has been made with ISO 1950. In my personal view, and what I've seen running quite wide regional roles, I think the UK leads the world in the application of BIM on projects. And I think a lot of this was to do with the mandate from government of BIM on BIM level 2 on public sector projects. And I think we need the same sort of move on data standards to drive us forward. And I know that currently Atkins is working with a Centre for Digital Built Britain on this. So I have really high hopes that we'll make some even bigger strides in 2021 on that. Of course, you know, information management, what's the point of that? Well, it enabled us to standardize and creates the ability for us to proceduralize tasks so we can reuse, automate, and optimize. And this will lead to, I think, a genuine step change in productivity and our ability to deliver value. So to sum up, the government has set some pretty heady objectives in the 2025 construction strategy, from reducing whole life life cycle cost of assets by a third, and reducing the time from inception to completion of new build by 50%. And I think we stand no chance of meeting these targets without leveraging data to transform our industry. And look, it's easy to get lost in the talk of data and transformation. I'll leave you with one thought that stuck with me when Atkins, when we launched our Digital Future program in San Francisco last year, and we visited, dim and distant past when you could get out of your own house, we visited Google and Katera. And they didn't talk to me about technology stacks. They didn't talk to me about apps. They didn't talk to me about interfaces, Google, any of that. What they talked to me about was relentlessly taking cost out of business processes. And that was their objective with what they were doing with technology. And that's something that stuck with me, and I think should stick with us as the reason for what we're doing. But thank you, Andy. I really look forward to discussing these points with the panel today.
Thanks very much, Richard, for those initial remarks, highlighting the role of a number of, I think, key issues there. The question of a common data environment, the need for that in order to properly share the information amongst different parts of the construction supply chain in particular. And also, I think, really hit the nail on the head towards the end there as well about we won't achieve what we need to achieve on the digital front unless we leverage data. And I think, I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion around those and other issues as this morning's session progresses. Our next speaker is Mark Reynolds. Mark is the Chief Executive of the international consultancy and construction business Mace. Mace have been responsible for some of the most iconic projects and programs around the globe. They employ more than 6,500 people, and they work across 5 key strategic hubs in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, the Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia Pacific, and are intimately involved in shaping the cities in which we all live around the world. Digital is absolutely key to what Mace does, and I think it's fair to say that Mace's people are often found to be setting and shaping the agenda in this digital sphere across our industry. Mark has massive experience in the construction industry. He's been with Mace for more than 25 years, and he's also passionate as well about taking part in industry organizations to try and influence the agenda there. And most recently, he is the skills lead at the Construction Leadership Council, and I think he's sure to bring to bear some of his experiences both in the industry and also with a weather eye to how do we attract that new layer of people into the industry, where I'm sure that digital is a key part of that. So Mark, over to you.
Apologies there. Andy, thank you very much. And you make me feel much better than I am. So well done. And Richard, I learned a lot just from going through that. So well done there. But hello, everyone. And I'm going to talk about some more practical things which might be relevant to help you shape and use how you use data. So some say that data actually is the new oil. And for me, certainly, if the last 10 months go by, that is certainly true. For many years, I've been saying to our teams and my colleagues that as soon as we can count it, we can manage and buy things much better. No matter what we do, how we do it, or what stage of the process, data is essential to help us make better decisions, learn and build a much richer and robust knowledge base. In 2015, we at Mace decided that we wanted to be a data-driven business. We embarked on building a strategy of building enterprise systems that would provide us with one source of the truth across our business. The reality is today, we are still a long way from achieving our aspirations. But the good news is that we're making progress. We've learned many, many lessons, both good and bad, that I'll share with you over the next few minutes. Now, our strategy is very simple, is to create a fully connected, dynamic business that uses data to support our clients, our stakeholders, and our people to deliver their projects and run our business much better. And we've looked at our processes. In most ways, we've selected cloud-based tools that will help build digital foundations, but importantly, provide the security that helps us so we are cyber compliant. And this is essential if we really want to be a truly data-driven business. As a people and management business, one of the most significant commitments we made to begin with was an Oracle Cloud ERP system. And we selected Autodesk BIM 360 and Glue. And these were assisting us to build our digital models to manage our projects. We're using things like Atkins to manage our project environment, which many of you are probably using already. And I won't pretend, as Richard mentioned, that standardizing our systems has been a huge cultural and business challenge, not just with our own people, with our clients, and who quite understandably have their own preferences. And one area, I'm going to pick a simple example, one area that you might think would be really straightforward, a site access control system. But let me tell you, that wasn't easy. And quite frankly, it took the coronavirus pandemic to get our teams, our clients, to realize the real value of this data and what we could achieve if you could think enterprise and data. And quite honestly, using one system, it has been transformational for us. Using Datascope and Power BI, I now receive daily reports using resources every hour on our construction projects, which are updated daily. During the first week of March of the lockdown last year, we worked out how much every worker contributes to our monthly turnover on our sites. And on average, we were employing 62,000 people a week who are generating £140 million a month. And I can't begin to tell you what impact that had when that dropped just to 2,000 people. On average, every person on our site generates £550 output per day and an average productivity output of £76 GVA per worker hour. We know how far they travel to work, what means of transport they use, their nationality, their trade. We can work out who is using public transport, and we've been able to share this data with London Underground and help them assess the impact of the coronavirus network. And even today, I'm using that information through information that was on TV last night and working with LU to overcome difficulties. And this is just one example where our data scientists and data analysts using and developing Power BI are creating absentee data of who've got COVID-19 and who's isolating. The industry is going to need these skills and tools much more in the future, as Richard outlined. The mere fact that our project teams, our MD, know the importance of this information, how it can make a difference, is changing the way that we manage our business. And this is important about how project teams use the information to manage projects much better. And we've been able to do that just by understanding, by using RFDI tags. We're able to create and see the trends that might be happening. We're able to create a digital footprint at every phase of the project. And in the future, we'll be able to link skills and competencies, which is a passion of mine, that we can actually overcome the essential things like building safety and competency that has been highlighted as a result of the horrific Grenfell tragedy. We really need to have open data systems, as Richard said, so that they can share across a common platform. And that's an area we're working hard through the CLC to integrate 37 different skills cards that we're able to have a consistent measure of everyone's common skills and competencies. So we know who's qualified and capable of doing the work that we need to deliver in the future. And we're building capability to capture and use data from design right the way through to operation by establishing standard components to build sub-assemblies and platforms that we can assign CO2 performance, cost, fire performance, which again allow us to build much richer and deeper database. And we can measure the progress of greater efficiency on site and productivity by finally being able to build, using the tools to understand productivity and build digital twins. And it's providing us with much more information to make better decisions, to seek areas for lower cost, to drive efficiency, improve safety, improve quality and productivity. And more importantly, productivity will allow us to pay higher salaries and attract more people to this fantastic industry. So we're using the power data to transform at every level, a level in our business, in our supply chain, and we want to use it to transform the industry so that we can make the improvements that we all need to make to help build back better and build back greener. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Mark. And it's interesting. You started off by talking about, or by using that statement that I'm sure a lot of people have used before, but it's maybe fallen into a little bit of unuse just because of passage of time. Data is the new oil. Because if there's anything that the pandemic has shown from a business perspective, it's exactly as you just suggested there, that how important data and digital are in the future. It's also good to hear that you didn't sugarcoat the cultural and business challenges with clients that you're inevitably going to have in a situation like this, because people do have their own preferences, in relation to the digital sphere, but also the fact that it's been transformational as well, the experience of the recent period as well. So, all good stuff for us to get our teeth into in the discussion. Just to let our audience know that if you do have any questions for the panel as a whole, or even individual panelists, then please post them in the chat. If you'd like to say where you're from, more than happy to give you a name check your organization before I ask those particular questions a little bit later in the program. Our next speaker is Alison Atkinson, who is the CEO and Managing Director of AWE, the Atomic Weapons Establishment, which is an organization that's responsible for the design, manufacture and support of warheads for the UK's nuclear weapons program. Alison has over 25 years experience in the delivery of large-scale, technically complex defence and nuclear programs, managing around £25 billion worth of investment in those projects in a highly regulated environment. She has a proven track record in managing an extensive technology, construction and manufacturing supply chain, and she's very used to engaging and working in complex organizations with multiple stakeholders, which I think is a key challenge facing everybody in the construction industry, but I hope is also a challenge that can actually be facilitated and made easier with the use of digital. Anyway, that's enough from me. Alison, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you, Andy. And also, I mean, thank you for inviting me on this, and listening and working with Mark and Richard is really quite insightful. We're all looking at this in a slightly different way. And I'm coming at it not so much as a delivery of construction, but in a client that procures construction for a manufacturing organization. And so you really are recognizing the tools and the digital tools that Richard has talked about, and how you then use that expertise and link that expertise with the construction of infrastructure that Mark has been articulating, and how it really is the oxygen of any business in terms of making the decisions in order to sustain businesses as we move forward. Now, it does sound very grand, AWE and nuclear weapons, but really we might make extraordinary products, but we are an ordinary business. And like you, we do tackle the what the digital revolution is really bringing in terms of improving our business. And there are many, many ways of improving that. And from my perspective, I'm going to focus on the infrastructure side of our business, where we are recapitalizing the infrastructure, the capabilities, if you want, that sustains the capability for what is our security, heart of the defense of this country. I think it's all about reliability. It's reliability of the business data that's coming through on what is a complex, integrated, very diverse organization and program, linking people, manufacturing processes in an environment that is constantly changing. And the aspects that really need to be thought about and worked through is the security of that data, and how that you can actually, the pertinent and the usefulness of that data and what you're trying to achieve. And we could talk about many things, but I'm going to focus on two themes. How do you use data to transform a business like ours that was set up over 70 years ago and is a science-based organization that has constantly evolutionized and iterated over the many years? And then what are the barriers in the industry to this change? Guess when I look at the AWE site, like many sites that all of you will have worked in, that we have some vintage facilities, things that are designed in the 80s and 90s, and you want to keep them going. The fabric actually is really pretty good, but you have to continually evolve it. Many of us will know that the lack of configuration drawings, redlined or probably hidden and lost in cupboards, and only Bob knew where they were found, is now something that we're now so much more better at using as we've been able to move from tape measures to our digital measures and technologies. And we have literally used virtual 3D models and BIM to understand how some of our existing facilities work, in order that we can actually look to our new facilities that we then build on our sites. And what's been fundamental to us, particularly with nuclear programs, is that you can fundamentally understand how your facility and the safety hazards that you need to understand before you can even build it. And the digital twins that Mark talked about are inherently important in being able to deliver certainty on what are these long-term projects. Our people, and particularly our operational people, our regulators, our fire service, people like that, they use VR technology now, so they can even understand how these things are going to work and how they're going to actually make the processes and even improve them before we've even built or manufactured them on site. Something that just brings certainty in delivery, brings schedules sooner and closer, and actually gives you certainty on the risk that you have managing on your site. We actually link now these models, and we're able to link these models to our operations, feeding in maintenance scheduling, for example, and the intelligence of that data and some of the AI improvements that Richard was talking about is really informing our asset management systems, not just the access to when you should do maintenance compared to the production programs that we would have, but actually you can almost time to the optimum position your financial investment such that you can optimize and get that cost out of the business, which just improves your productivity. And it allows you to prioritize your production at system and subsystem level. Dashboards from then can then enable us on my desktop. I was pleased to hear what you said, Mark. I too have real-time measure on some of my infrastructure projects, because you've been able to link BIM modeling to your project controls, your inline and your inline spec controls once you're building this stuff. And we've learned that and translated that over from our production facilities, our production lines, where we've got that constant improvement on taking out time out of those processes. And we found, and we haven't really talked about it, but one of the things that I'm passionate about is how we share that skill set. And that is one advantage as a client organization that we have, is being able to share the skill sets between our supply chain partners and our operators, and learning across the optimum way of learning some of that digital enabling, and then the data usage that's important from it. This has been truly transformational for us, particularly during COVID. We have been able to, with social distancing, use an awful lot of these tools to be able to continue to maintain and produce during this time when it's been extremely challenging. What we have learned, though, is that the generation of data is volume, it's easy, it's the insights that you wish to gain from it that the decisions need in the business. And we've had to work really hard on our business intelligence tools to really understand what's pertinent and useful to us. And importantly, the precision you need on the data that you ask for. Otherwise, it's just an unending fountain of generation of useful information, but not pertinent. There are still some barriers to this, in my view. And the second point that I would bring through, and it's a frustration of mine as a client, that there are many, many platforms within the business, within the industry that are used. And I do think, and perhaps it's something that the client should be doing, is being able to be really specific about the standards that we wish to use, but also how we collaborate across those different systems too, because the sharing of that data does enable us then to cement the way of working, which is particularly important for us. I think the point to BIM models is how do you get consistency across the business, across the industry. The reason I say this is that for our organisation, that cements the way that we're going to work for generations. And when you link the digital savvy of our generations of engineers and operators and manufacturers coming through with people like me who probably were brought up through an analog at the back end of the analog age, but are still the critical decision makers, there is some cross learning and probably pairing that needs to be done in the generations as we bring through the next talent, the people who are going to do our jobs in the future, and understand how that works. My final point, and I make really no apologies for this, is that the data and our ability to access and interpret it quickly for the decision making is the oxygen of any business. But the challenge we have is really what's pertinent, what's relevant for what we're trying to achieve, because they could be very different for our businesses. What's important and relevant for Mark, what is maybe different from Richard, which may be different from us, from me. So being able to understand that and be clear about it is important. We all struggle with the richness and the volume, and yet we feel at times our insight is poor. What's it really telling us? Because you do have to have a deep understanding of that subject that you're looking at, that the data is telling you about. So my approach has been to apply it to those critical parts of your business or project that's going to deliver better and faster outcomes. But when you're in the pursuit of data, remember at the end of the day, in construction or manufacturing or operations, it can only inform because it's really the skilled people on the end of it with the right resources that makes the things happen. So use that data to inform what resource is needed by when and by whom is really the art of what we get from this digital age. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Alison, for those insights, and also I'm a simple journalist, so I think in sound bites, and data is the oxygen of any business, or data and the ability to interpret it is the oxygen of any business. And how true is that? And again, something that has been underlined in the recent period as well. And really interesting to hear your insights as well, as an organisation where security of data is of paramount importance as well, and some really interesting not just questions, but I think challenges as well. How do we use data to transform businesses where maybe there are legacy issues? Well, there are legacy issues in every industry who work in every business who work in a certain way. But how do we get over those and bring in data to transform those industries as well? And I'm really glad you finished off, on the last point, because notwithstanding the transformational role that data will and can play in our industry, it's still about the people as well, who actually interpret that data and produce the fantastic outputs that we see on every high street, in every in every community up and down the country, and indeed across the world. Because after all, that's what makes the infrastructure sector the best industry to work in anywhere, I think, on the planet. But then again, I'm a little bit biased. Anyway, so let's move on to our next speaker. Keep those questions coming, please. Our audience getting stacks of questions coming in the chat. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. But our next speaker is Stephen Dance. And Stephen is Director of Commercial Advice and Delivery at the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which is the UK government's centre of expertise for infrastructure and major projects. And I think it's fair to say that the IPA sits at the heart of government. It reports to the Cabinet Office and the Treasury. And you probably don't get much more important reporting lines than that, apart from the Prime Minister, I'm sure, is actually involved in that process somewhere along the line. Stephen has 35 years of experience in social and economic infrastructure projects, and before joining the public sector in his current role, he was director of the International Property Advisors DTZ, where he specialised in a range of complex development transactions in the field of infrastructure, urban regeneration, and also public-private partnerships, where he played a key role at Partnerships UK in heading up their major projects team delivering innovative project models for the MOD, amongst others. He structured the delivery agreements for Crossrail, and he also played a key role in assuring the venues and infrastructure procurements for the London 2012 Olympics. So like all of our panelists today, I think it's fair to say that Stephen knows absolutely what he's talking about, and I'm sure he's going to provide us with some very, very interesting insights. So Stephen, no pressure, over to you.
That's great. It makes me seem very old. I think I'm going to have a word with my executive assistant, who has clearly put my 35 years of experience on the CV. I think I'm going to change that to 15 and make me look a bit more current. I think probably would be better. Anyway, the great thing about speaking last in these events, Andrew, is that good speakers have come on beforehand and said all the good stuff, and I can just say, yeah, I agree, sit back and say, well, that's the government for you. We'll take all of this great advice and great work that industry is doing and put it into our sausage machine and do our very best to make sure we can create some more treacle for you to address. Because without the challenges that we give you, what would life be like? So being serious for a second then on that, I thought just listening to what Richard, Mark, Alison have talked about, I think there's a sort of massive opportunity that's been identified. I'm really taken with this idea of productivity and improvement, and I'll come back to that because that lies at the heart of why government is concerned, frankly, here to see improvement. I mean, I would like to see, and it's a personal comment really, rather than a sort of government piece of government policy. But throughout my professional career, I have found that wherever we try and hide information or sort of keep it secret and say this is my information, it's my power base, it's my knowledge, I'm going to use it and exploit it and leverage it. Usually that doesn't last very long, and it leads to inefficiency, and it doesn't really certainly doesn't work for public benefit. And frankly, I don't think it really works for private benefit for very long either, because with similar ideas and ways of using stuff. So I would like to see data really become a common and free good. And that isn't just sort of data in terms of the technology that we've been talking about, but is geospatial data. It's data on buildings in operation and maintenance and life cycle stuff. It's engineering. It would cover the whole gamut really of things, and I would like to see us sharing it really, and sharing benchmarking and sharing what good practice is doing, and I think that would actually get the flywheel going much more. And it's been great. I think the speakers this morning have really have got behind that and would agree with that. There are still areas where I think that doesn't happen nearly enough. I've had some experience where I think utility companies and others say, well, we can't let you have this data because it's personal and it's private and it would breach our sort of regulatory rules, etc. And I get all of that, and that is obviously important that people's personal data isn't breached in a way. But the discussion has really got to move into, I think, that space which says we are using this collective data to improve productivity so that we can actually make a difference in the efficiency and effectiveness with which we construct our built environment. And that will go to building safety, it will go to net zero, it will go to modern methods of construction, it'll go through to procurement and the way in which we contract between government and the private sector construction industry. So that's a sort of bit of a personal vision, I suppose, to put out there, but I don't think it's inconsistent with what government is, as a whole, is planning to do. And as people on the call will know, and I'm sure people listening in on the webinar will know, we published our construction playbook in the 2 weeks just before Christmas, that document is intended to set out a way in which we reset a relationship between government, the public sector, and the construction industry. It was driven by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister out of a recognition that when the economy is in deep trouble, which I think I can probably say it is, I think actually, I don't think I'm going to be breaching a confidence to say that in the meeting when we discussed it, the Chancellor said the economy is in a pickle. And then he went on to use some slightly different language, which I probably wouldn't use. But but when the economy is in a pickle and we want to build our way out of trouble, and we are looking to build better and faster and greener, then we've got to really look at that whole issue of a set of organisations that have been unproductive, a bit uncompetitive, where we've probably procured in the wrong way in many circumstances in the past. So that's what the construction playbook is looking at, and as part of that, it looks at clearly the sort of whole life cycle of the building, from a number of different perspectives, from carbon, from cost, from the way in which we procure and use modern methods of construction. And at the heart of all of that has to be embracing, the way in which we use data to measure and plan our built environment. So what it looks at, and what we need to be looking at here, is design, specification, construction, operation, all of the data that is necessary to support effectiveness through those various stages. And the one that is often forgotten, which I'm actually having a great debate about at the moment, is the fact that we keep knocking these buildings down and replacing them. So Mark is very happy with this, because if we didn't knock down old schools and rebuild them every 40 years, he'd be saying, well, hang on a minute, I've got nothing to do because you're still in old buildings. But from a sustainability standpoint, I think looking at how we measure carbon footprint and how we start to put in, and this is in the construction playbook and is certainly very heavily where the IPA is starting to think about, how do we get a whole life carbon footprint, and how do we start measuring that, and how do we start thinking about how we use the technology, the digital technology we've been talking about, and the capturing of data to extend the life cycle of our buildings in an efficient and effective way. I still don't think that will mean that Mark, Richard, and Alison are out of a job, because there'll be loads to build, but we do have to think about how we build it better and greener and a bit faster. That's all I wanted to say, actually. I could probably rabbit on for ages about UK BIM frameworks and Digital Built Britain and Ordnance Survey and geospatial data and digital twins, but you know all about that. So I'll just use those as prompts for the future. Hopefully you heard all that.
Yes, absolutely fine.
Speaking to thin air, I've no idea.
No, that was it. That was excellent, Stephen. And again, as ever, some really interesting insights. And I'm glad you gave a plug to the construction playbook as well, because there's quite a bit in there about digital transformation. Obviously, data, a big part of that. I'll put the link to the construction playbook in the chat. we're now at the point where we're going to have a bit of a conversation and field some of the questions that we've actually received, the many questions that we've actually received in the chat. And there's been, I mean, we're not going to get to them all, so I apologize in advance to those whose questions we don't get to. We'll try and get to most of them, and that rather depends on how quickly our panelists can actually provide succinct replies. I'm going to ask one a question that I think encapsulates a number of the questions that have actually appeared in the chat, and that is, with information being gathered more quickly than ever before, how much of a concern to all of the panelists is data security? And if I can just ask that question first of all to Mark Reynolds. Mark, how much of a concern is the security of the data that we're collecting?
Clearly, GDPR is always on our radar, and the impact of 4% of your total turnover is a concern. And, you know, I'm sure we've all had minor GDPR breaches in our organisations. And, you know, we certainly in larger business, you know, you have teams having to look at that. So it is a huge concern, which is why, you know, it's quite important to get standard protocols in place, particularly the larger organisations. And it's important that the systems you use are robust. And, you know, quite frankly, it's the reason why we've gone to a cloud-based approach with, you know, solid organisations that provide that cyber security. So I did check recently with someone who do a cyber check on us, and you know, they said to me the best thing to get into anyone's systems is drop one of these pens on your floor, one of those, and plug it in your machine, and you'll soon get into anyone's software system. So there's a little tip for you if you want to try and breach someone's security. Alison, you're probably more concerned with that than I am, but I do know how your systems are encrypted, so it's not as easy. But look, let's not mind that it's a huge issue for us all to be careful on, and nothing to be undermined. A lot of training is needed within organisations to ensure that we do not breach those security requirements.
Alison, you've probably got a unique, well,
I do.
An interesting take on this issue, given what you do. Your thoughts on this issue of data security?
So it has been something that we've obviously worked with, understood, and evolved over decades, given what we do. You know, and I think the challenge for us is, how do you embrace the digital transformation safely? Many of us will have moved from on-prem type data collection. Everyone's in the cloud. All the systems are in the cloud. So you have to be, this is where I talked about being precise about what it is that you need to use. What can you safely have in the cloud? What actually do you need to really secure? And we've worked very closely with CP&I, which is the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, and we've helped develop policies with them and tested. So always a concern, front of our minds. You know, even the sort of the training, we do an awful lot of training actually around all our employees and our supply chain on what's acceptable, what's not. And it's similar to GDPR in that you just, as long as you work within the framework and you have an individual interest and you're alert to it, it's just one of those things. You're never going to be 100% right, but always be cautious as opposed to flamboyant with it. But I got some sympathy with Stephen's point about share the data. It's a bit like Wikipedia, isn't it? You know, or Wiki Economics. You know, if you can share that data and learn and innovate, you actually improve some of that security too. But it's really about being able to segregate safely. Would be my thought.
Thanks, Alison. Richard, your reflections on this issue?
Andy, look, so I think the you know, there's probably some quite different challenges, aren't there, around data security that, you know, particularly Alison would have. Because I think there's been some quite shocking things happen last year, and certainly companies like Garmin been held to ransom and paying a ransom because it was an immediate threat to their entire business if they once they'd been hacked and their systems locked out. And I think that's a slightly different threat to having your information stolen, isn't it? I mean, probably more immediate and devastating effect. So I think the information security is and certainly from some of the work we do with secure clients, that we know the number of attacks, etc., is going up exponentially as over the last year as we've all started working remotely and transmitting more data and accumulating more data. So I think it's a really hot topic, and will only get more so. I'm not sure I have the answers to it, unfortunately.
Stephen, Athena Livesey in the chat responded to your exhortation to share data. Agreed that it was a great idea, and she's seen how innovators can really reuse data for the good. But she's asking the question: is there not a national security risk for sharing data on assets, and how do you propose that we do this safely?
God knows. Yes, probably is the answer. But look, we can make some progress without it necessarily being a sort of national security issue. I agree. There's asset information that for some reason or another you don't share. We need to have holes in our Macs because the Secret Service tell us that you can't tell anybody what asset that is there, and that can on occasions cause some issues around how we plan and develop and construct. But I suppose I'm really going back a bit more basically to areas such as benchmarking, for example, where we're still, frankly, when I look at the 40 hospitals program that we're building, and I ask myself, I ask anybody, well, what's the benchmark for building a hospital in the United Kingdom? I don't actually get a straight answer. Nobody's coming to me and saying, well, we've got 5 or 6 construction companies, we've got a number of designers, and they've all worked together, and here you are. Here is what it costs you to build an A&A unit anywhere in the United Kingdom, and here are the factors you should be taking into account. And I'd say the same, frankly, with flood defence. I'd say the same with historic and listed buildings, and there's a whole range of areas where we could just share data, and where it would be massively helpful in all of the planning and design development to get that through. I think underground assets would be another area where, I can't understand why that is a GDPR issue to share data on underground assets, unless you're going to sort of tell me that I've got a tube line running underneath my house or something, and somehow or another that breaches my personal data. We're not really talking about epidemiology here. We're talking about construction, what we build in the built environment. And back in the 1980s, we were talking about benchmarking clubs, and I was at a meeting last week where they were talking about benchmarking clubs. Have we not moved on a bit to a point where we could actually really think about putting that stuff out there publicly, in just so I can Google what it costs me to build a hospital, and then when I go to Mark and he tells me it's going to cost twice as much because clearly I've designed things that I shouldn't have put in there, at least I've got a starting point.
Thanks for that.
I don't want to interest the Chinese either. They're not going to hack my system to work out how much it costs to build a hospital here in the United Kingdom, or indeed, unless they wanted to laugh, how much it costs us to build high-speed rail lines compared to what they build them for in China.
Thanks, Stephen. Interesting question coming in the chat from Gordon Masterson from the Edinburgh University School of Engineering. And he says that there is a DIKW hierarchy: data at the base of the pyramid, then information, then knowledge, and then wisdom. And he's saying that data needs several transformations to become wisdom. Does that hierarchy apply to construction? And do we now have all the tools to convert data into wisdom? And I think I'll field that one first to Mark Reynolds. Mark, what's your thoughts on Gordon's point that he's making there?
I wouldn't quite go far as wisdom. I think, let's just use it. We're all building data sets, and I use some analogies I always have in our business. I can make better decisions than many of my colleagues because I have several data sets to pull upon. I don't have one. So if one says, you know, someone works on site for 8 hours a day, I use the site axis because it's really simple and easy and it's not complex. Someone works on 8 hours a day, but actually, you know, that's one data set. If I've got two data sets, it's actually, they're only actually working for 4 hours a day because they're actually non-productive. I've got a different data set. It actually then says in that 4 hours, they've actually only done something which actually is incorrect and has got to be reworked. It has no value at all. So if I was to say, oh yeah, I'm doing a great job, I've got 8 hours a day, I've got one, you know, I'll make a decision. If I've suddenly got 3 data sets, I'm now using that information to make better decisions. So I think that's the differentiation between wisdom and information.
Thanks, Mark. Richard.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of points. I think Mark's making some really great points there, and I think I'd characterise as a shift from measuring inputs to measuring outputs, which is, you know, obviously key to driving performance. I mean, just in terms of the data and the hierarchy, I think you know, I'd difficult not to agree with that. And I was talking to one of our key people in that area just last night, and he gave me a great example about so what would practical application of digital twins look like in terms of making use of data, and he gave an example of the Grenfell disaster and inquiry and subsequent actions of trying to find every building that's got that sort of cladding on it and spending tens of millions sorting through drawings. And the example he gave is if we had national digital twins for those, you would run a query and have that answer back in, you know, 20 seconds. So of that type of cladding on X buildings, and you'd have the location. So I thought it was just a great practical example of a difference that sort of capturing that data and having it in digital twins would make. So an example of turning that data into wisdom, if you like.
I think it maybe speaks again to Alison's point that she finished on when she mentioned that, you know, it wasn't just about the data, it's about the ability to interpret and actually make a difference with that data as well. Would that be part of actually having that, I suppose, wisdom-led approach? Alison, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes and no. I think I mean, I agree with all the points that Richard and Mark have said. And can I just say hello, Gordon? We knew each other. We worked together years ago. From my perspective, wisdom really comes from experience, and it's experience of multiple factors. It's not just the digital side. It's not just the data that's come out from digital. It's the learned experiences of, actually, I understand what that could be telling me, but actually I think it's saying something else, because it comes back down to, in some aspects, gut instinct. You know, I'm a very data-driven person. I find comfort in it, but I also, and many of us will be like that, particularly for engineers. Sorry for those of you if I've just offended by saying that, but I say that as an engineer myself. And I think we find comfort in it. And sometimes you have to stand back from it and realize that the input is, it's to the point of the input's only as good, the output's only as good as the input. And if your input's not very good, whatever the computer says, you have to interpret that. So just don't take it blind. So there's the multiple things, the multiple aspects that Mark said. But I do like it. I will use that analysis. Dicwa. Thank you.
There's an interesting question coming in from Rod McDonald, who again is he's a former chair of Borough Happold, and he's now doing a bit of work for Heriot Watt, and he talks about the fact that the management and operation of infrastructure, big infrastructure projects, can go on for, you know, well, more than 100 years. And how does data sit in that context? Rod's asking. You know, he's saying that, you know, the challenges around that when real-time big data integrates the operation of transport, water, electrical energy, buildings project, you know, when maybe they can end up in silos. How do you see the infrastructure industry grasping, you know, as data comes in these different areas, you know, when you're talking about keeping it for a long, long time, you know, are there any specific challenges around that, or does it just add to the richness of what we have available, what we have at our disposal to make the industry better? I mean, I don't know whether Stephen has got any thoughts on that. You know, the fact that these massive projects are actually keeping information for, you know, such a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, what you say? And I think probably looking at the rail and transport sector is a big part of that. So, you know, you've got Network Rail that is still using assets that go back to Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and we are currently, as Richard will attest, using building a high-speed 2 rail network that we expect to be talking about in 150 years' time, and probably referring back to the days when Richard Robinson was part of the design development team. So it's a great question. I think the starting point for me would be to work out where the responsibility for this, the collection and where the information should reside, and then making it available. So I think that is sort of Network Rail. I think that is Transport for London. I think that is High Speed 2 Limited, as we sit here today, who have a massive role to play. And, you know, I think they are playing it, by the way. So this is not a sort of call to arms to collect, assemble, collate, and make available the data that is going to be helpful for the future. The other thing I would say is I think cities have a role to play here. The leadership of cities. So in London, I think has been good actually at starting to map certainly geospatial data, and other cities too have followed that, not just in the UK actually, but around the world. And anything we can do to sort of open that up, make that more accurate, more available, more accessible, I think will be massively helpful to productivity in construction. So going to, you know, the mayors of the combined authorities and their organisations and helping them and making them cognizant of the benefits of this sort of long-term, I'm going to call it corporate knowledge, but it's not corporate, it's geospatial and geophysical knowledge. I think they have a big role to play as well. And that will then play into the smart cities agenda, because it will help them link transport and digital connectivity and social movement and, you know, the other factors that come into play in that agenda.
Thanks, Stephen. Mark, do you have any comments on that massive scale of data across some of these big infrastructure projects that last for decades?
Yeah, I mean, I touch on a point that, to begin with, about how we compile and assimilate data really quickly now, and you know, you see it every day on the coronavirus updates. You know, this is all pulled from data sources that, you know, from Google effectively, and using Power BI tools. So they're actually using various different tools to pull data together to give us that. So I think that really important point is something that we've just got to, you know, within datas of cities. I mean, you look at GIS. I think I just questioned Stephen at one point on GIS. There are critical infrastructure networks which are subject to CPNI. So it's not a case of saying we can open up all GIS data, and there's nothing worse than not knowing where a secret tunnel is when you're putting piles in the ground, and it has been known to put piles through secret tunnels and not know where they are. So there are some risks of CPNI data. I see Richard smiling there. Clearly Atkins know of some of those experiences of an insurance claim on that.
No comment.
I am speaking from School of Hard Knocks on that one. So I think you've got to layer this, and I think, you know, the whole thing around GIS, built environment data, how people move around cities is really important. Actually, that's probably easier now to do and understand how people use cities, move around cities. You see that on the transport network. And then you take it up to the actual built environment and physical environment is another step forward for us. And this is a matter of time. 20 years ago, we spoke about these things, we couldn't do it. I am sure when 5G comes on, this will be another transformational step for us, which will allow us to start moving things forward and sharing data in a different way. So I think, technology enables us to do this in 3 years' time. So I think the biggest step forward will be 5G. I don't know what others think. That's an opinion rather than anything else, to be honest.
Thanks, Mark. We'll come on to what people think. Where all this is headed to. Towards the end of the event. But I just want to ask a question about. It's great that we've got some of the biggest and most influential organisations and industry and companies in the industry that are actually embracing data and embracing a much more digital agenda. But as we know, the majority of the companies that are working within the construction and infrastructure sector are SMEs. How do we ensure that they also actually embrace that agenda, and do they need to be supported in order to do that as well? Because if we don't bring the small to medium businesses on this journey, then there's going to be challenges for the industry as a whole. And thanks to Darren Ianson for asking that question. So I'm going to put that one first to Alison, if I may. How do you think that we ensure, looking at it from a client's perspective, maybe, how do we make sure that we bring on the diverse range of organisations that construction has in its ranks, if you like, to embrace that digital agenda?
So, thank you, Andy. I do think, and you see this through government policy, and we've talked about the construction playbook, we talk about the sustainability agenda. There are many things that you can nudge through policy, and then as a client enact through your commercial arrangements. So by specifying and being really clear, not necessarily of the tools, but of the standards that you wish, and then you're prepared to commit to an arrangement that brings that through. Because thinking about the last question, we've spent many decades reacting to a lack of architecture about record management and improvements, whether it's on a small facility scale all the way up to cities and the way people have evolved and we move around. So the architecture that comes through from the last question and a very proactive response to it. And government policy and the way that we procure is evolving to a much more collaborative, enabled partnership. Mark will know that. We're very keen on doing that here at AWE with his organisation. And it's a sea change in the sort of risk understanding, because that you're putting something in place. It's not just a building. It's not just a road, or it's not just a railway. It's a means of transportation. It's an economy investment. It's a growth. It's a generational impact. So clients have a really important part to play in how they construct their partnership arrangements so they can get the best. And the challenge that we talk about is, how do we bring the best from the market? I don't know who they all are, but Mark does, Richard does, Stephen will do. And so the challenge for us is to put the arrangements in place that can garner that, not to come in with a specific idea. Yes, you can be challenging about performance you expect, productivity you expect, but in terms of how you get there, you enable that together, would be my view. And we are much more moving in that direction as a client to insist on it. I don't know if you've got a comment, Mark, on that.
Yeah, and I mean, Alison, I think that's a really important point. And what I would say is, it does start with the client customer. I also think it starts with, some basic stipulation from government, because there are too many, clearly not most people on the line, get this, but, you would not believe, I have had some clients say, we're not interested in using BIM on our projects. or we're not using, we don't really want to create a digital twin. So ultimately, if the client is willing to do that, then we're not going to do it free of charge. And, and if we're willing to do it, if we're not willing to do it free of charge, then someone else will do it, the job, and they may or may not do it at all. So you're left in a situation where you're never going to get the information. So I do think there is a criteria. If there is a need, this is like saying, we want to be net zero carbon by 2050 and government bring it forward to 2040. We've got to put certain rules and regulations on asset owners to provide certain base information as a minimum. And then it would happen overnight, because it's a bit like paying your taxes. As soon as you have to, you're asked to do something, you fill out a form and you have to submit it into a system, it will work. And you actually don't need all of the data, you only need a part of it. You need what critical base data, which is the point you've made excellent points you've made several times, Alison, is choose what is appropriate and what is necessary for you. So I think that is where Digital Build Britain, the Construction Leadership Council can really help people to say, as a recommendation, as a minimum, this is what we should stipulate in all contracts, whether you build at home or to whether you build in a massive redevelopment. That's what's a minimum requirement, taking things forward.
So, I mean, we've got to be careful here, haven't we? Because we don't want to just say, just because someone's an SME, they might not be as sort of digital savvy as others, because there's some absolutely fantastic organisations out there, small niche organisations who are absolutely at the cutting edge, and could probably teach some of the larger firms a thing or two as well. But I think, is there something about culture here as well? How do we change people's behaviours, perceptions, to convince them to value data in construction and get that all-embracing outlook? Because at the end of the day, we need everybody to be, I suppose, to be, to use that hackneyed phrase, to be singing from the same hymn sheet on this issue. How do we do that, Richard? What's your view on that?
Well, Andy, I'd sort of link two answers there. To the previous point as well. I think that you started the point I was going to be very similar to the one you made, which I think I wouldn't take the point of view that we need, that big companies need to hold the hand of small companies in technology. I think, as you said, quite rightly said, it may well be the other way around, and I see lots of examples of that with some really innovative stuff. And I think generally people have become more technology enabled, haven't they, through the use of smartphones over the last 5 or so years. And I thought sort of think about when the crisis started, and we were busy deploying teams at the time, but we hadn't quite deployed it. And I think if we'd have thought, we planned it in the normal way in our business, we'd have thought about it for a few months, planned it for a few more, done some trials and all of that, done some training, and actually we just switched it on and everyone used it in a couple of days. So I think there's and I think that mindset is and how SMEs work. I think if that, there was a great point, Mark and Alison, I think, via the government contracts and setting that expectation would set is a good signal to everyone to work together on it. But I certainly wouldn't say that SMEs are not capable of working in a technology-enabled environment. Just the opposite.
Stephen, what's government doing in this area to encourage that I suppose pan-industry approach to this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, I put in the chat, I mean, I do want to see us use contractual terms to drive better use of technology and sharing of data. I think that is a good way of getting a degree of consistency. And I'm with Mark and Alison in saying we've got to be careful how we do that, because we do have a habit of asking for loads of information that we really don't need. And then actually probably not asking for the information we do need. So we tend to throw the kitchen sink at it, and maybe we've got to think a bit carefully about how we go about doing that. But I do want to just raise one little point, which is about the fear of technology and the fear of data, and the fact that I think there is an attitude out there which sort of says, look, if we suddenly all get very productive, and we can design we can design systems in 3 weeks that previously took us 3 months. And this is, this would be dead in Atkins sites, I'm sure. How the bloody hell do we get paid for that productivity? Because we're suddenly hugely more productive, but actually, what happens if there isn't anything to build or there isn't anything to design? And therefore, and I do think that sort of fear factor sometimes lies at the bottom of the behavior that we do sometimes still see of not wanting to engage in data collection or not wanting to engage in the technologies that we've got. Ultimately, of course, that won't work and it won't last because disruptors will come in and sort it out. But so from a government perspective, I think on the popular side, we would be pressing quite hard for capturing of data, sharing of data, particularly the whole life stuff and the measurement of performance of buildings. In the unpopular side, we will be pressing quite hard for the sort of innovation in design technology and construction technology to be, pushed to the point where we can actually design, build things for both quicker and at less cost as a result.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Just to sort of, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I just want to sort of start to maybe stargaze a little bit as well, because I think it's quite important, to do that. How do the panel see data impacting decision-making around infrastructure delivery? And how do you think it will actually impact on changing the industry and how it's seen and what it does? And again, that's a big question, I know, but how do we think that will be the case? And if I can throw that one at Mark first, I know that you're often at the cutting edge of futurology in the industry on a number of different levels. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think let's start with an important point that Stephen raised about benchmark. I think the industry did a load of good work in the late, this is showing my age now, in the late 90s with the Egan report around benchmarking data. I think we lost some of that. I think if you look at housing, there's good cost data in the industry for build cost data. I think if you look in other areas, it isn't shared around. So I think there is a need to do that. Stephen's point about any companies, cost consultants, their living is about benchmark data. So they're not going to be too pleased if that's all open source and that's not available. But let's just go through what the vision looks like. And for me, this is looking at the whole life cycle from development, an idea, an asset need. I have an asset need to do something, right the way through to operate. We can have much smarter briefs. We could, that will be available online. We'll know how to use them. You won't need the necessary technical knowledge initially to get those things done, but you will form that. But moving things forward, and this is where the whole thing of re-engineering comes on board with design of sub-assemblies, platforms, standard components that link with all of the costs, lifecycle assets, which is in a design configurator. Now, one of the threats we have is, using AI, and we know already that you can design certain accommodations, which would normally take 300 hours, takes 50 hours using AI data. But then that goes into CAD/CAM, that goes straight through the line. Your supply chains are fully embedded. Certain elements are critical. They will all be tagged and tracked through the process. And where it goes, where that material flow processes, where it is in delivery, how it's being assembled, just like it is in automotive. It is there today. But this is going to be sitting on a 5G platform, so you know exactly where it is and where it's installed. I see construction being an assembly process for the majority of the work. It's not for the, using the phrase from Brian Berriff, FMB, the biblical trades necessarily. But we will have that asset data built in. And we will then be able to source that data in our assets without I think we're only 10 years away from that. So it's coming quickly.
Thanks, Mark. Richard, your view on that. How do you see data having that? What specific real changes do you see? The impact on decision making around infrastructure delivery. What can we expect?
I think put simply, we'll be able to do some decision making, won't we? It's as we talked about before, and Alison will see, have great insight on both sides of this. In manufacturing, not even modern manufacturing that's been going on for 20 years, you're getting data and you're optimizing, you're making decisions on a minute by minute basis. And I think our resolution of that time span in construction at the moment is weeks and months, isn't it? So their ability to bring that down and to optimize and to operate more efficiently, I think is where we'll see it happen. And I wanted to just respond as well on the point from Stephen around the hours question. If we haven't got all these hours to burn and earn money for, what will we do? And I think I hear that, and I've heard that actually from some people in my business as we optimize and we're driving hard on our design transformation digital future program. And I think it's almost a bizarre concept to suggest that we should carry on being really inefficient just so we keep ourselves busy. And I think we'll find better, higher value things to do when we've collected the data, automated and optimized those more mundane design tasks, frankly, and it will open up a world of better things we can spend our time on. And I think our client, I suspect if I halved our design time, which is certainly one of our objectives in Atkins, then I think Alison and Mark would be beating a path to my door to use the services and get things done quicker and faster and cheaper, wouldn't they? So what, as a business, why wouldn't I want to do that?
Thanks, Richard. Alison, you spoke earlier about how data had impacted your business. How do you see it impacting it into the future, and how do you think that our industry and the whole infrastructure sector is going to change as a result of that?
I'm just listening to the other guys, and there's two. I absolutely get the vision that Richard and Mark have been talking about, and you can see it coming. I'm going to get a construction production line, if that makes sense, apart from when you're in the ground and the biblical effects. What I worry about, two things, are the latent defects that you will end up, we've all got experience of it, particularly in some of our critical infrastructure, that could come through because of the pace, the checks and balances, the configuration, and those type of things. And the other thing I worry about is some of the uniqueness that you get from a human intervention around shaping a design, the textural feel, the human element. And I will always be cautious over that sort of futurology, if you like, that we don't get too much standardization that loses a bit of style. But in terms of how it's going to improve, I always remember that the BIM modeling, particularly that we put together right at the start of that concept, can absolutely set the operations and the production of all the way that you'll use transport systems for generations. And having that at the forefront of your mind as you're doing that, I think is going to be what we'll need to learn as an industry. That what we're setting, are we setting it in stone, or are we allowing that to evolve? And it'll be an interesting conundrum in 10 years' time.
Thanks, Alison. I'm just going to ask another question, which is very much sort of speaks to the kind of industry we're going to be in the future. And I think if I can ask our panelists to sort of reflect on this, and I'm going to bring in Richard last as well to kind of sum things up from his perspective on the event as well. But given everything that's been said, do we as an industry have the right skills to fully exploit the power of data? Do we need to do more to attract the best data analysts, data scientists, those digital, sort of experts really that are going to assist the industry going forward? Or is that something that's actually evolving within the industry as almost a natural, organic thing anyway? And I'll start off with Mark on that front. What's your view on that?
I think the straight answer is we don't have all the skills we need. I think we are evolving, and as organisations learn and develop, they will choose the pace that they want to operate. But I think we have to build a pipeline of talent with those future skills, and they won't necessarily, have to have the core technical expertise. And you'll find I think the industry will be much more diverse in its capability going forward. But we will still need strong technical competence across the industry. So never underestimate that. Is always going to be needed, but there'll certainly be new skills. So my biggest advice is move at the pace that you feel comfortable as an organisation. But as an industry, we need to put the into the industry with the right capability going forward. So that's about attracting and training the right people.
Thanks, Mark. Stephen, a lot of what the government's trying to do in terms of digital transformation focuses, that's going to be key to how construction actually becomes more efficient going forward. What's your view from where you're sat? Does the industry have the right skills to fully exploit this, and do we need to do more, and if so, how?
Yeah, of course we always need to do more. My perception is that the industry is moving this way pretty fast, actually. Talked to Mark and a number of his peers and peer groups, and people in the second and third tier of the supply chains, some of the SMEs. You're quite right. They are moving this way. They're moving faster than they've moved. We might say not fast enough, and couldn't it be better? And we've got to get the right environment. Of course, you're going to need the skills, etc., to go with that. And actually, I would say we're going to need the skills in government to know what we're asking for. Why we require this stuff, and what we're going to do with it when we've got it. And I think that is something that we have to think about from our side. But if we want to get roads from sort of flash to bang in half the time that they currently take, so currently, from concept to driving a car will probably take you about 10 years to build a road in the United Kingdom. We want to get that down to 5 years through design and construction and planning, of course. Then we're going to have to embrace this stuff, because otherwise it's just not going to happen that way.
Alison, you're obviously working in a highly digitized environment with people who are experts in that kind of stuff. What's your view on our industry and infrastructure more broadly? Do we have the right people? How do we get them? How do we attract them?
I can see as a client that we can pull this at a pace, and I see a real appetite in the industry, particularly the infrastructure, the construction industry, to really pull themselves aligned to production. You can see that with the sort of interactions we have. In terms of skill sets, you reminded me of my own internal focus group. They are sort of 19, 17 and 11. And I see the education that these kids are getting. They are hugely, hugely more digital than we would ever expect. And I think the generations that are coming out will grab this and push this over the next number of years, as long as we enable that. When I come back to my point about, we're not as familiar, they just expect it. They're so savvy. And so while the technical skills will be there, I absolutely believe that. And they'll take this much further at a pace much quicker than we can probably imagine, as long as we as an industry leadership can give them the environment, the structure to do that. And I think it will. Hugely positive about it. I think about my 11-year-old daughter and what she's already doing. Thanks,
Alison, for that. Richard, your reflections on that, and also some closing remarks to sum up what you've heard today on these issues. Richard, you're just muted. We just need you to unmute. So if you just start again.
There's always one, isn't there? There's always one in every call. So
so your thoughts on that and your reflections, summing things up.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of attracting talent, you need to have people who can operate video calls properly. But we've noticed at Atkins, we've got a partnership with Oxford, Cambridge and UCL. We've noticed that graduates are focused on supporting climate change and supporting a better built environment. We've seen key computer science talent turning to our sector for a fulfilling career. you know, whilst we might not ever compete with the likes of Google and Facebook, etc., the ability to access data scientists at market, you know, at prices we can afford for staff, frankly, is changing. So, you know, so I think there's a definite trend our way on that one. Look, I mean, I think in sort of summing up, you know, first things first, I just want to say thank you to the panel for your fantastic insights and giving up the time to join us today, because I know your time and your role is incredibly precious. So it's really appreciated. I'm sure all of our audience today appreciates that too. Looking, and I think, you know, in terms of taking a few of the highlights out of it, I think just, you know, Mark's talk at the start about the amazing productivity insights that he's gaining in his business really struck with me, and even down to the ability to be able to tell TfL how many staff are travelling where on public transport at the moment. I mean, what an amazing step forward. You don't hear that from an awful lot of businesses, do you? And that's something that really struck me. And obviously, I think Alison's oxygen is data is the oxygen of business these days. That's one that's going to stay with me. And I think and also the challenge that you had, Alison, around as builts from the past. You know, the question I didn't get a chance to answer at the time, but the point around what do we do with all this data on major projects. I think it's the point to me, or a strong point to me, is discipline. It's the same as when we had things in drawings. If you just finished a project and throw them all in a back room and disappear off, it's the same as leaving all your data just languishing around in different servers. That challenge isn't too different, and a lot of it is around real discipline to close projects out properly and get all that data in a usable format. You know, volume of data and pointing it at things that actually matter and finding the insight on that, Alison, you know, that was another one of your great points. And then Stephen, I think the productivity been key to government. I think none of us should forget that point in the supply side. So that's I just want to end on the productivity point, I think, and just say again, thanks to the panel, and thanks, Andy, for hosting and steering our debate so well.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard, for that, and to all of our panelists today for not only their insights but also their generosity as well. I've noticed a number of conversations in the chat with different people answering questions as well, which is, you know, absolutely excellent. And for me, it says everything about this, you know, brilliant sector that we all work in, because we are about collaboration and we are about discussion and debate. And I think we are about sharing as well. And after all, this is what this event has been all about. And I also want to finish with Alison's comment on, data may well be the new oil, but the ability to interpret it is the oxygen for any business. And it's great to see and to hear that our sector, despite the challenges, that we have, and we know, that we need, to move faster. We could always move faster, but the industry is actually moving at pace and moving in the right direction on this particular issue. And I think, that point needs to be made, because it's an important one to be made. So thanks again to everyone on our panel, to Alison, to Mark, to Richard, and to Stephen. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks to Atkins, who are playing an absolutely critical role in highlighting this digital agenda, and I'm sure that will continue into the future as well. And thank you very much indeed for everyone for taking part and for also being generous and contributing and asking questions. Really, really appreciate that. It's Friday. Hope you have a great weekend, and hope to see you again on a future infrastructure intelligence event in the not too distant future. So thanks very much again, and have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.